There's just about half an hour to go for the most important meeting of Prime Minister Modi's America tour. At around 8:30 p.m., Narendra Modi will be meeting American President Joe Biden at the White House. This is their first in-person meeting ever since Biden became president, and all eyes will be on the chemistry the two leaders are able to create and also the decisions that emerge from this important meeting.
It's a meeting that will have repercussions across the globe spectrum. The leaders of world's oldest democracy and world's largest democracy face to face as the world closely watches. US President Joe Biden will be hosting Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House on Friday. This will be the first time Joe Biden is meeting Prime Minister Modi in person after being elected as the President of the US. The last time Joe Biden met Prime Minister Modi in person was back in 2014, when Biden was the Vice President under Barack Obama's presidency. The two leaders last spoke on the phone in April during the peak of the COVID crisis, when Prime Minister Modi thanked the US for its support and solidarity in time of need. In the last 6 months, a lot has changed. The global economy is shaky. Taliban is back in Afghanistan, and China is aggressively widening its influence. The two leaders will have their task cut out, from vaccines to climate change to defense. Tonight's meeting will have a lot riding on it. Bureau Report, India Today.
Joining us at this moment from the lawns right outside the White House in Washington, D.C. is our Foreign Affairs editor, Geeta Mohan. Geeta, give us viewers a full sense of the agenda Prime Minister Modi takes to his meeting with American President Joe Biden and the expectations in the Indian camp from this first in real-life meeting between the two leaders.
2024 Modi ji! 2024 Modi ji!
Well, it is going to be a very significant meeting, Rahul. The first in-person meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Biden. The first meeting after Biden assumed office. But let's just first cut to the color. That's the Indian community over here, Rahul, waiting to welcome Prime Minister Modi, trying to get a glimpse of him. The cavalcade drives from the streets in front of the White House. If you can see, the White House out there. Absolutely cordoned off, Secret Service now in place. We were all right in front of the White House, now have been moved to the upper lawn. And here people, Indian community again, people from the Indian community waving, excited about Modi again returning to
Yes! We are all from here, different areas of DC, and we're looking forward to see him.
All right, looking forward to see him. Rahul, as always, they're all very excited, trying to get a glimpse of the man. But let's talk about what is in store for India and the United States of America. The first meeting of the day is between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Biden. It is going to be a very important one, a significant one. Strategic cooperation, COVID, conflict, climate. All these areas would be covered. But more importantly, when it comes to the situation, security situation, the regional security situation is going to be very important. Afghanistan is important for India. The tone and tenor, Rahul, was set yesterday when Vice President Kamala Harris, upon touching the issue of counter-terrorism and terrorism alone, she raised the issue herself, the issue of Pakistan and terrorism emanating from Pakistan. That speaks volumes, Rahul. But also remember, it was in a way damage control. Secretary Blinken was meeting Shah Mahmood Qureshi. There was a statement out where the U.S. Secretary of State appreciated Pakistan's role in Afghanistan, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi would not have gone into the meeting with Biden with such a negative statement coming in from the United States of America. It does not bode well for India, for the international community to be appreciating any effort by Pakistan right now when everybody knows, including America, the kind of support Pakistan has extended to terror elements. And that's the reason why, even without mentioning Pakistan, India did not even have to do it. Kamala Harris mentioned Pakistan and spoke about counterterrorism. So she really set the tone and tenor for talks today. The bilateral meeting will be followed by Quad. We'll talk about that later. But first is a big meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Biden.
Joining me for perspective on this broadcast this time is Ambassador Navteej Sarna. He's been India's ambassador to the United States amongst various other prestigious postings. Professor Christopher Clary is a non-resident fellow at the Stimson Center, joining us from New York. We have Jun Isumura, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute from Tokyo, and Adil Brar is a China expert and scholar. Navteej Sarna, you've been, sir, part of many such bilateral meetings. Give our viewers a sense of what to expect. This is the first in real life meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi since President Biden assumed office. There was a bit of build-up where it may have seemed to people that Team Modi was seeming to support the Trump re-election campaign, but now both will be meeting. If you were bringing together a meeting of this nature, what do you think would be most likely on the agenda, and how do you see things pan out?
Well, I think, thank you, Rahul, for having me on the show. I think it's important that we realize that this is the first in-person meeting after Mr. Biden has been president. It's also the first meeting after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. And it's a meeting which President Biden comes in with a feeling that there is a certain amount of pressure of domestic issues and the need to show that America is not giving up its global leadership role. Having said that, I think from the bilateral aspect, it's very important that this for the last 20 years, we've seen an upward graph in the India-US relationship. There is a change of administration, and this graph has continued through different administrations. It's very important that this relationship be personally established between the two leaders, and the visit give an impetus to different aspects of the relationship: the security, the trade, the people-to-people, the movement, the multilateral cooperation, like in the Quad, on which we can discuss further, in all directions. So I think this is going to be an underlining of the strategic partnership between India and the US, and there's going to be particular focus on the regional security, I would believe, and on the Indo-Pacific. And both in the bilateral followed into what happens in the Quad. These are going to be the major areas of concern. And other things will, of course, follow.
Christopher Clary, can you give us a sense of the mood at this moment in the US establishment when it comes to this big meeting between Joe Biden and the Indian Prime Minister? How are American think tanks, the American establishment, the American media viewing this meeting?
There was a lot of concern, I would say, in New Delhi about President Biden's election and Vice President Kamala Harris, and a belief that the Democratic Party had been taken over by skeptics of India. But you know what? It's fine. The relationship is doing okay, because the strategic interests that guide the relationship, the concern about the rise of China, the concern about terrorism, those strategic interests are still there. And the scaffolding that supports the U.S.-India relationship in Asia, the Quad and other parts, are being built out. There's still a lot of work to do. The sense is that China challenging the United States is unparalleled in certainly my lifetime, and I think there's a lot of people that think that it is unparalleled even when you consider the Cold War, because of how much more dominant China's economy is than whatever the Soviet Union was able to muster. And so that means there's enormous consensus in the establishment to strengthening the relationship, even if there are concerns about democratic erosion in India. And obviously there are concerns about democracy here at home in the United States as well. So there is a sense that we live in a bit of a glass house. The Biden administration has been very clear about the humility that we should have those conversations. But the big strategic interests that guide the relationship, those are still present. And I think that's why we've seen so much continuity in that upward trajectory that the ambassador just spoke of.
Let's spend a moment talking about the Quad meeting, because it's the first time that leaders of Japan, India, Australia, the United States will be meeting in person. Jun Isumura, your sense, sir, from Tokyo on how Japan is perceiving this first in-person meeting coming as it does on the back of Australia, the US and the United Kingdom coming together to form a military alliance. How does the Japanese government view this particular meeting that's taking place in Washington, D.C.?
Thank you. Actually, the Quad is proposed by former Prime Minister Abe in 2006. And can you hear me?
I hear you well, sir. Please go on.
Yeah. And there are many problems of Quad because of the still just framework of the four countries. And we need more developing developing of a specific purpose and plan or program of Quad. Otherwise, just today, no headquarters, no leadership, just like afternoon tea, but without scones, cakes, and sandwiches. So it's very important. And also importance is the cooperation with ASEAN countries. And without ASEAN, the Quad is quite meaningless.
It's an interesting point that you make about the high tea without any sandwiches and scones. Adil Brar, there's no sandwich, there are no muffins either. There's just tea, and that tea itself seems to have irked the mandarins in Beijing quite a bit. How actively is this Quad meeting being tracked by Chinese think tanks, by the Chinese state-run media, and what are they making or what will take place later tonight at Washington, D.C.?
They're absolutely watching the Quad meeting in Washington. They're thinking about Quad, especially in context of ASEAN. That's where they've been trying to make sure that the Quad does not become a popular group and they are not able to divide certain countries within the ASEAN. And that's why you'll see Wang Yi traveling to the ASEAN region to make sure they don't join the Quad or become part of the grouping. So they're definitely watching what's going on in Washington, D.C. They're particularly watching the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, as well as the relation between Australia, US, and India here. So they are definitely concerned. They've called the Quad a clique. That's the word they like to use all the time. They have called it the Cold War mentality. And they continue to use these same types of narratives to make sure that they are able to reflect their own ideas onto Quad. And for their own part, they make sure to tell their own people that these kind of things never work out. You have, democracy is messy, and you've seen this in India and elsewhere in the US, where democracy never is able to come together into a coherent working groups. And that is why they look at Quad as something that could in the future fall apart. But they are definitely looking at the equation between India and President Biden. That's the one they are particularly concerned about, because there's been talk about India joining Five Eyes Alliance and India becoming part of the intelligence sharing mechanism, which will be difficult to come together groupings during the meeting and context. But they are concerned about India joining somehow some of these other groupings during the meeting, and something coming out of the meeting in Washington which helps India to counter China in the region.
I want to go across live to the White House Bureau Chief of the Voice of America, Patsy Vidukuruswara, joining us on this broadcast. Patsy, you've been speaking to sources in the White House. What sense are you picking out about the significance President Biden attaches to his meeting with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and how does the Biden establishment see this relationship shape up from here?
Well, they certainly see it as a very important partnership, as you know, as you've noted, and your panel has noted, that India is a strong player in the region and a very important player in terms of balancing U.S. interests in the region vis-a-vis China. The main focus of the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden this morning, should be happening in about 15 minutes now, is about climate change as well as vaccine production to combat the pandemic, as well as a number of other deliverables, including cooperation and initiatives in the form of securing supply chain of semiconductor chips, as well as as U.S.-India space cooperation. So there's a number of deliverables that can be expected from this meeting. And of course, from that, a couple of hours later will be the Quad Summit between the two leaders as well as the leaders of Japan and Australia, which will again strengthen U.S. Partnership in the region against China, which is burgeoning in terms of its presence, both economically and militarily in the region. So the White House definitely sees this as an important partnership. They are very careful, however, to underline that this is not a security or military alliance or cooperation, more of an informal deepening of the partnerships in the region.
Thanks, Patsy, for joining us. Appreciate your update. That's the White House Bureau Chief of the Voice of America, joining us from Washington, D.C. Navteet Sanna, it's interesting that this Quad in-person meeting comes on the back of the new Australia, US, UK alliance, which is a military alliance. And the Quad isn't. And it was very interesting to hear Jun Isomura from Tokyo talk about how it's high tea without any muffins, without any cake, without any scones to go. Do you think that this military alliance in some senses pushes the Quad willy-nilly towards coming together in the form of a more coherent alliance, even if it's not a military alliance, pushes it in that direction, or not quite?
Actually, I think Quad and AUKUS is completely different. And AUKUS is, because of this is a sort of defense business for submarine of Australia. Actually, 2014, the Prime Minister, Australian Prime Minister promised to Prime Minister Abe to buy Japanese submarines, but next year the situation completely changed, and they decided to buy French one. So that is very complicated issue, and maybe now the U.S. and the U.K. try to get submarine business of Australia. So that is completely different two forms.
Okay, let me put that question to Navteet Sanna. Is this just about switching a submarine contract from France to the United States? Or do you think it's something much deeper? And Mr. Sanna, how does the formation of this military alliance impact the Quad in your view?
Well, I think you said it. This is essentially a security and a military alliance. And it is, it is something quite separate from the Quad. The Quad has come through very cautiously, has come through step by step. It's more a political statement. It's more a coming together of four democracies of the Indo-Pacific who are seeing that China's aggressions need to be countered in more ways than one, not only militarily. So as you see, the present Quad agenda is heavily civilianized. There is vaccine production, there is climate, there is critical technologies. You may see an addition of infrastructure. You may see an addition of connectivity, countries offering alternative economic paradigms to the countries of the Indo-Pacific rather than the Chinese debt traps. Of course, security is an important aspect of the Quad. After all, the full name is Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. And there are exercises like Malabar is now virtually a Quad naval exercise. So I think the two things can exist together. Of course, they will play into each other because two of the Quad members are members of AUKUS. Japan has supported AUKUS. So naturally, it will be difficult to keep the security aspects completely separate and completely out of view. And China knows that. The downside is that China will attack both AUKUS and Quad with equal ferocity now and not try to distinguish that this is more civilian and this is more military.
Let's spend a moment, Christopher Clary, talking about Afghanistan. Given the humiliation President Biden has had to deal with internally and externally on account of his country's inglorious exit from all of Afghanistan, what is the view at this moment about how India and the United States can work together in salvaging the mess that Biden's left behind?
Well, both India and the United States have a geographic problem, that Afghanistan's a landlocked country. For India, the problem is that you have Pakistan in between. For the United States, the problem is that you have Pakistan in between. India has been able to use Iran as a route to get in there. That is troublesome for the United States because of the multi-decade-long problem that the United States and Iran have had. So, I think it's very difficult to salvage what happened there. We have a mess. That mess could go on. There are factional infighting between the Taliban government. If Afghanistan showed, which I think it does, that the United States is a declining power, it also showed that India is a power that has not yet risen. India decided to kind of sit out the collapse of the Afghan government that had done so much to support. And it did so partially because of these geographic constraints. But, I think the bigger issue for New Delhi and Washington is to try to think about what to do about Pakistan, which is bigger than Afghanistan, which is a bigger terrorism problem for the neighborhood than Afghanistan.
Apart from just making noises, Christopher Clary, do you see Washington, D.C. under the Biden administration actually push back Pakistan harder? Or will they just make noises and leave it at that?
Well, noises are something. The president's refusal to get the prime minister on the phone is a sign of displeasure. I think we'll see, there are still, Pakistan still is in charge of those air routes into Afghanistan. So as long as there are U.S. citizens that we're trying to evacuate, as long as we want to have drone access over Afghan skies, Pakistan's going to have some options there. But I do think the United States and India need to have an honest conversation about risks we're willing to take in Afghanistan in order to give additional policy options available to us in Pakistan. And frankly, India has been upset with America's Pakistan policy for a long time, but there just were only so many ways to get into that landlocked Afghan country. And now that is less of a priority, that does open the policy space a bit.
Adil, what's the view in China on developing the relationship with the new Taliban administration? We've seen some $31 million being given thus far. That's really not much given the kind of sums that Beijing is committed to as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Will they look to deepen the relationship even further, or are the leaders in Beijing likely to first see how this infighting that Christopher referred to between the different factions of the Taliban first resolves itself before making a deeper commitment?
Exactly. So they are looking at the Taliban itself, how the Taliban is trying to figure out their way. They want assurance from Taliban that they would not interfere in China's internal affairs. So I think before they go out and give more money and cooperation to Taliban, they want that assurance and actual action by, making sure the ETIM or other groups are not again active in Xinjiang or other parts of China. And that is the assurance that China is looking for. You'll see there have been meetings between the Chinese ambassador in Afghanistan, and those meetings are, on the sidelines of some cooperation, but there has not been anything concrete that has come out of the meeting. So it's only the money they've given recently, and that's about all we have seen so far. So they're looking at the Taliban, how Taliban will shape up, and who actually is able to grab onto power, Kabul, and based on that, China may reorganize its strategy.
Now that's interesting because Navteej Sarna, on Afghanistan, given the mess that President Biden has left behind, and a lot of that would really be on his account, regardless of whether he sees it like that or not, how can India and America work together on Afghanistan given the limitations of the geographical and political context at this moment?
Well, it's true that the U.S. is no longer in Afghanistan, but it is also true that the U.S. will continue to work on Afghanistan in different ways. And I think India will need to seek that cooperation and make sure that our interests are kept in mind. One, of course, is Pakistan and how pressure is put on Pakistan, and Pakistan doesn't end up becoming an interlocutor for the U.S. With the Taliban. The second is going to be working in the multilateral sphere, for instance, the UNSC Resolution 2593, and to make sure that there is international pressure on the Taliban to keep in line with those requirements of the international community. The third is humanitarian aspects and making sure that, the huge investments that India has made in Afghanistan can be preserved in some way, and then to be part of the various dialogues that with Central Asia, the United States, etc., which will work in ensuring that Afghanistan does not become a hotbed of terrorism. So there is work to do on Afghanistan still, and simply the absence of US troops, damaging as it is, should not be the end of the story.
Okay, I want to go across now live once again to Washington, D.C. Our Foreign Affairs head, Geeta Mohan, is now back with us as she walks around the lawns outside the White House and gives us a sense of what's happening on the ground as we wait for this big mojo moment. Geeta, take it over.
Well, yes, in moments from now, we'll see Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrive at the White House. Rahul, a very significant meeting. It would be between the two leaders. Like we have been emphasizing that this is their first meeting as Biden as president, but not the first in terms of the meeting between the leaders. They have met before in different capacities. Biden was vice president and senator as well. But then again, a lot of people say there could be some problems between the two leaders. The problems only lie with the challenges when it comes to Indo-US relations, and that has to do with maybe issues regarding trade, visa, and such. When it comes to the larger aspect, Rahul, India is considered a key ally right now. America needs India in Afghanistan and in the region, and to ensure security and stability in the region. And therefore, we see not just coming together of two countries, but also a continuum in policy when it comes to taking things forward. There is a forward momentum on how the two sides want to move forward. There is an aspect of defense and military as well that is involved in the meeting between the two leaders. We do not really know exactly what the agreements or announcements are really going to be, but there is a key military aspect to the bilateral relations between India and the United States of America, and there could be some key announcements on that front as well. There is going to be no trade forward movement on trade or trade agreement, so to say, because the FTA is still stuck. We've been hearing of a mini trade deal for a very long time, Rahul, but that also is not happening. But then again, there could be an intent to how the two countries need to move forward and create space to ensure that markets between the two countries and trading between the two countries are in work in tandem. And now, more than ever, because of China. Now, talking about China, China is going to be a huge factor, not just in the bilateral, but also during the Quad meeting. And when I speak of Quad, Rahul, it's interesting that right outside the White House, it's not just those who are concerned about Chinese aggression when it comes to certain, countries and areas. There are people who have come out protesting against China and Chinese oppression within China and reaching out to the Quad leaders. It is interesting. We've seen this today. We saw this yesterday outside Hotel Willard when there were Baloch and people from POK protesting against Pakistan and seeking help from Quad leaders. And now we see specific protests against China over here right outside the White House, again looking to Quad leaders to ensure that there is some sort of semblance of sanity and less oppression in regions that really affect them. So very interesting that they're now coming out and reaching out to Quad leaders, but that is going to happen a little later in the afternoon.
You know, Vice President Kamala Harris has tweeted moments before now, and I want to tell our viewers what she said. I met Prime Minister Modi to reaffirm the strategic partnership between the United States and India. Working together, we can make progress on important global issues, from the COVID-19 pandemic to the climate crisis to strengthening and defending democracy. Now, there are two ways of looking at this. People like Subramaniam Swamy questioned why Kamala Harris hadn't tweeted about her meeting with Prime Minister Modi, even though she tweeted about some much less important meetings that took place after this. She has tweeted this morning. Would you read that as being a bit odd, the fact that this tweet comes the next morning, given that the meeting happened last night? Or are the likes of Subramaniam Swamy just making a mountain out of a molehill?
Are you asking me? Sorry.
Yes.
Well, I think there's a tendency to over-examine Kamala Harris in India. And I think we shouldn't do that simply because she's partly of Indian origin. We should not over-examine everything she does or does not do. She's the Vice President of the United States. And I think the fact that she has met the Prime Minister and she have met is a significant fact. It's nothing out of normal, and it's that they've discussed everything. Now that is an important meeting. Whether somebody tweets about it immediately or tweets about it a few hours later, in my view, doesn't matter. But I think you will always find people who will want to pick holes into any situation.
Okay, interesting. The relationship with Kamala Harris, because so much is said in India about this relationship, and Christopher Clary, about the fact that she didn't tweet last evening, became a big talking point on social media, not just amongst random trolls, but even amongst people with a certain public standing. Now she has tweeted, which should hopefully put some of that unnecessary commentary to rest.
You don't have a very public meeting with the Prime Minister on the balcony of the White House unless you realize you're going to publicize it. So there is no subtext. I hate, for poor Subramaniam Swamy has to go figure out what controversies he'll court each day. It must be busy for him. It must be quite exhausting, but this isn't one of them. The Vice President wanted to have a high-profile meeting with the Prime Minister. She had one. She apparently brought up Pakistan on her own recognizance, which is clearly something they knew India would be pleased by. We are now in the at least 1 year, if not 18 months, of people having imaginary concerns about Kamala Harris, and it's nonsense. She is an establishment politician, and the establishment viewing the United States is that the U.S.-India relationship should get better.
Okay, we're now expecting virtually any moment for Prime Minister Narendra Modi to meet with Joe Biden. Maybe Geeta Mohan can tell us about